So we have hopefully an interesting topic today. And the name of the topic is Trump's shift to America Only Rattles Markets. And it comes on the heels of last week's call, which was really, asking the question, is uh, is Trump Winston Churchill or Neville Chamberlain? And we concluded with the real risk that Trump may be turning into Neville Chamberlain. And it should have been expected, based on what we discussed last week, that we would probably confront some serious market turbulence. And that's exactly what's happened. And we're going to get into that over the course of this discussion today. But before we get there, I want to say a word about the great Alan Greenspan, who passed on Monday, June 22nd. He passed away at the age of 100 years old. And he was really, I guess I want to say perhaps the most influential Fed chair and maybe the most influential head of any central bank, um, certainly in modern times and perhaps ever. He served as Fed chair for 18 and a half years, from 1987 until early 2006. And the length of his tenure at the central bank, at the Fed, really speaks to the incredible respect that every US president that served during Greenspan's tenure there, the great respect they had for him, and their fear that if they didn't nominate him again for another term and another term, that financial markets would go into a free fall because this man, Alan Greenspan, was such a master at his job, and really can't compare anyone, at least who came before him, or I think even after him. He just was unique uh, and played such a significant role. When Alan Greenspan took over the Fed in 1987, in those days when the Fed would come together and meet, and they'd make a decision on what to do with interest rates, they didn't announce that decision to the market. In fact, it wasn't until 1994 that for the very first time a Fed chair made the decision of what they did with interest rates, made it known to the public. The market, analysts, economists, we would have to try to, look at the tea leaves and look at the financial markets and try to figure out what the Fed's decision was. And it would normally take, several hours till even up to a few days before investors and Wall Street would figure out what the Fed's decision was. By 1994, Alan Greenspan decided, you know what, it's time we start to become a little bit more transparent, and we'll announce what our decision was. Did we raise rates? Did we leave rates unchanged? Did we reduce rates? So pretty amazing. And in fact, in those days, during the entire Greenspan's 18 and a half years, he did not hold press conferences after the Fed met. They didn't release official statements for years. Uh, it wasn't until the 1999 to 2004 period where Alan Greenspan began to periodically release statements about what the Fed thought about the state of the U.S. economy. Now, Alan Green, it's not that he never spoke to the market. He did. He would make public appearances now and then, and he would address the market, speak to investors publicly on TV. But he was always incredibly difficult to understand. We would really parse through his words and his language, and we still couldn't understand what he was saying. And we thought we couldn't understand him because he was just so darn intelligent, right? His intellect was above the intellect of any other economist. But really, after he retired, he told us that he was confusing very much on purpose. He didn't want anyone to know what he was saying. And the reason why he didn't want anyone to know what he was saying is because the Fed really wasn't sure that what they were doing with interest rates was working. See, that's how primitive central banking was in those days. Central banking has moved, has improved so much that now they know when they raise interest rates, they understand that it is likely to cool the economy by a certain amount. It's likely to reduce inflation by a certain amount. Central banking has become much more sophisticated, just like everything in our world has become more sophisticated and more precise. But in those days, they were sort of guesstimating a lot more than central bankers do today. And because they were sort of making really rough, educated guesses, they didn't want their communications to the financial markets to be very precise, because if they were wrong in their pronouncements, they didn't want investors to know how wrong they were. And if they were really wrong about their forecasts about the economy, the forecasts of what their policy was doing to inflation and on economic activity, they didn't want to lose credibility. Right? They didn't want financial markets to question their knowledge and their abilities. So Greenspan very intentionally was very difficult to figure out, right? Super interesting. And again, we didn't not know that at the time. He didn't confess that to the world until after he retired, and actually after the Fed was far more sophisticated and able to be far more precise in with their instruments and their tools and their management of the economy. Now, during the Greenspan era, as I said, he was there for 18 and a half years. We went through many crises. He took over the Fed in August of 1987. Just a couple of months later, he experienced his first major crisis, which became known as Black Monday. On Black Monday, which happened on October 19th of 1987, the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrials, dropped by 22.6% in a single day. And thankfully, Alan Greenspan was there to sort of save the day. And he stepped in and did all the right things. And, very gradually, or not so gradually, actually, the market regained confidence and we didn't plunge into a disaster. We had an S&L crisis, a savings and loan crisis in 1990 to 1991. I'm telling you this for a reason, because I have a personal story that I'm going to get to that I had with Alan Greenspan. Then we had the 1994-1995 Mexican peso crisis, which also threatened the U.S. economy. Then we had the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which also had a spillover effect to the U.S. economy. Then in 1998, we had the Russian financial crisis, and Russia defaulted on their government bonds. And very shortly after that, the largest hedge fund in the United States collapsed. That was Long-Term Capital Management. And then finally, in 2000 to 2002, we had the dot-com bubble bust. And Alan Greenspan was there for all of them. He knew just what to do in each of these circumstances, and none of these crises turned into a calamity because of Alan Greenspan. And he became known in the not only in the financial circles, I think in the world at large, he was known as the most powerful man in the world because he saved the United States and the world so many times from financial disaster. Now, this little bit of background, I want to close on Alan Greenspan by sharing with you a personal story. So, in the early 2000s, when I was working at Citigroup, otherwise known as Citibank, we hosted a conference in Washington, D.C. And Alan Greenspan was our keynote speaker, right? So this giant in the world came to our conference, and he was our keynote speaker. And I was 36 or 37 years old at the time. He spoke, and there were a few questions, and I had a question. I raised my hand. And my question to Fed Chair Greenspan was, why is it that you are so quick to cut interest rates, but when you raise interest rates, you're so gradual, you're so slow moving. But when you cut interest rates, you move dramatically, aggressively. And the reason why I asked that question was because it always bothered me. It bothered me that the Fed was always there to save reckless investors, right? When you cut interest rates very quickly, that tends to cause a falling stock market to recover very quickly. So the Fed was there to save reckless investors, but when they raised interest rates, they were so cautious and gradual. It looked like they never wanted to hurt anybody. So that was my question. And he gave me an answer that maybe in retrospect sounds very simple, but no, at least no one in the room and very few people, I think, in the world ever thought of it. His answer never occurred to anybody. And it left an imprint on me. And it taught me a very valuable lesson that I applied over and over again to my own investing, and I continue to apply it. So I learned something very personal from Alan Greenspan, and I'm grateful to him for the lesson he taught me. And it's the following. When the Fed is raising interest rates, the economy is expanding. There's a risk that inflation is accelerating, and maybe it is accelerating, but the Fed has time. It's not like a massive crisis is about to break out from a fast growing economy or rising inflation. That's not an economic crisis. And therefore, the Fed can move very gradually, very cautiously. And they don't want to move too abruptly, because if they move too abruptly, they could cause an economic crisis. So it makes sense. It's the prudent thing to do to move gradually, to increase interest rates every few months by 0.25%. Maybe if things really need to move more quickly, they could raise interest rates by maybe 50 basis points now and then. But they'll never raise interest rates 200 basis points, right, in a day. That'll never, ever happen. But when they're cutting interest rates, and you can see how many crises I went through during the Greenspan era, right? When there's a crisis, the risk is economic Armageddon, financial Armageddon, where the unemployment rate could spike up very, very quickly, and you could end up with massive job loss. You could end up with a banking crisis. You could end up with a housing crisis. The Fed has no time to wait. They need to move aggressively for the good of the economy and the American people, and sometimes for the entire world. So therefore, policy needs to be at times asymmetric, raising interest rates very cautiously, but sometimes cutting interest rates very aggressively. And in fact, you could go from interest rates being at 5% to interest rates going to zero and the Fed printing money in a matter of a day, right? We've seen those type of aggressive moves. Now, that was a big lesson in and of itself. But the other lesson for me as an investor is that things can look just picture perfect. And in the blink of an eye, things can head south in a dramatic fashion. The rug can be taken out from under your feet faster than you can utter a word. And I've seen it again and again in the course of my career. And that lesson that Greenspan gave to me on that day in the early 2000s, again, it left an indelible imprint on me, and it served me very well a few years later in 2008 when I saw the risk of a financial crisis coming, and I bet on it. I bet on it very big. And time again, even for those of you in the foreign currency program, you'll see very often, sometimes we're sitting without a position because I know that a position can blow up on you in a very, very nasty way and make cause irrecoverable damage to you. So when I don't know what's going on and I get concerned, I close my positions in a heartbeat. I do not wait, right? And that happens in markets. And that was a lesson that Alan Greenspan taught me, right? That when things move badly, they can also move very suddenly. So you may have heard this phrase before. Um, Sometimes a crisis unfolds slowly and then suddenly. And when it's unfolding gradually, you don't even realize it. And then once it's sudden, it's too late. You lost the moment to react. Because in the blink of an eye, the market can be down 20, 30%. And by then reacting, you miss the boat. So that lesson was taught to me by the late, great Alan Greenspan. And, there's many phenomenal obituaries that have been written about him in recent days. He really was a incredible, I met him. I didn't know him incredibly. I can't say I knew him. I learned this lesson from him, but he was certainly an incredible Fed chair. And again, as I said, probably the best that the world has ever seen. So
Hey,
now let's,
Seth,
yeah.
before you move on, just a quick question. I saw some news thing about him, uh, in recent days, and I think they were showing a clip from 2008, even though based on what you've just said, he wasn't Fed chair at that point, but maybe they brought him in like to testify or something, and he seemed to have been. He said, "Well, I wasn't expecting this, or this is beyond anything I could have imagined." So I was just curious what your take is on that, that even he didn't see that coming.
Yeah, this is something that pretty much, a couple of people saw ahead of time. I think I've spoken to you about, I had a meeting with Alan, uh, with Stanley Fisher, who was the vice chair of the Fed. And then he became the chair of the Central Bank of Israel shortly after he left the Fed. And in this meeting, I was questioning Stanley Fisher about the health of the US economy and the financial system. And he was just completely missing it. And that's when I knew, I got to short this market because the Fed doesn't see it coming. And I remembered Alan Greenspan, this market's going to collapse and the Fed is not going to see it coming. They're going to miss the boat. Now, if Alan Greenspan missed it, that tells you something. Because one other thing I should say about Alan Greenspan, I have worked with people who were very close to Alan Greenspan, that worked with him at the Fed, some people who, worked on his staff. And they told me no one knew or has ever known economic data the way Alan Greenspan knew economic data. He would know how many airplanes were produced per day, how many automobiles were produced per day, how many houses were built per day. This guy was on top of the data like nobody else. So if he missed the boat on the financial crisis, the housing crisis, it tells you something. But yeah, hardly anyone saw this coming, and I did, but it was obviously based on a hunch, based on a hypothesis. I didn't have like a tremendous amount of hard data supporting me, but I smelt it, right? I did enough research, and I have a knack for sort of seeing things that aren't necessarily in the economic data. But yeah, I can't fault Alan Greenspan. Hardly anybody did see it coming.
By the way, Seth, just a quick comment. It's Alan.
Yes, Alan.
I was a bank examiner in those days, and I saw all the negative amortization loans they were making. And I said, this is not going to end well. I didn't know how to take advantage of it like you did, I guess. But I said, I kept thinking to myself, this is not going to end well
Wow, very
when they're
interesting.
that desperate to make loans like that.
Yes, yes. You know, people like you who were really in the nitty-gritty of the books of the banks, and someone like Alan Greenspan would not have access at that point in his career. He wasn't in the Fed, so he wasn't looking necessarily in the weeds of bank balance sheets the way you were. But yeah,
I just
Alan, I
wish I
always,
could have taken advantage of it. That's all.
you know what, a good hedge fund would have plucked you out and right. Yeah.
So Seth,
Anyway,
you and the Big Short guy, what was his name that was in that Big
Mi-
Short
Mi-
movie?
Michael Burry.
You guys were among the few that saw it. Even Alan Greenspan didn't see it.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so let's get into our topic. Trump shift to America only rattles markets. So the the United States, you know, I have been so bullish, so optimistic until the last few weeks about the way the US and Israel waged the war against Iran. But very quickly, it has turned into somewhat of a surrender. America surrendering to Iran. And this is not good for market sentiment. You know, America the brave, America the courageous, uh, you know, that's good. And when we were fighting the war, the markets were up and down, they were volatile, but the trend was positive, even in the face of, you know, high oil prices, higher gasoline prices. The market was weathering the storm pretty well. Why? Because we were winning, and winning is good, right? Winning is good, especially when you're defeating a dangerous theocracy that is, you know, spreading evil and trying to topple democracies in the world. When you're defeating a dangerous power like that, that's good. You're making the world a safer place. But America the cowardly, that's not so good. That's not so good. And yes, oil prices are down. Oil prices are down because the Strait of Hormuz is opened up. Oil prices are now down to where they were before the war, in the, you know, mid to even lower 70s. And it's true. The polls, you know, why did Trump shift? Uh, Polls showed clearly that the war in the United States was unpopular. And Trump, you know, rather than behaving like a leader, rather than explaining to the American public why this war was necessary, he behaved like a short-sighted politician and just doing what's easy and convenient and perhaps popular in the moment. And, you know, he folded and we folded against a relatively weak enemy. You know, why do I say relatively weak? Because, you know, we decimated their military power, you know, in the first days of the war. You know, how many times have I said it? Has Trump said it? Has Pete Hegseth said it? That they no longer have a Navy, they no longer have an Air Force, they no longer have an air defense system. You know, we decimated them militarily. So they very quickly became a weak enemy. And yet we have backed down. And we backed down, and simultaneously we turned against our only reliable ally in the world. And I want to emphasize this point. It's true. You know, Trump asked, you know, all our so-called democratic allies to come help us, send ships to the Strait of Hormuz and help us open up the Strait of Hormuz. No one volunteered. No one said yes. The only country in the world that stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States and fought this war was Israel. So it's not an exaggeration to say that Israel is the only reliable ally of the United States in the world, right? Maybe that's not a politically correct or politically popular thing to say, but we got to speak the truth, and that's the truth. And Trump, while he's turned against our model ally, what is he saying about the Iranians? Now he's saying that this is a new regime. He's called them nice. He's called them decent, right? In a Truth Social post just today, and he said it repeatedly, he's saying that these nice, decent leaders have opened up their country to allow inspectors from the Atomic Energy Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, to come in and ensure that they are not rebuilding their nuclear capacities. Now, Trump is either a bit naive here, or his advice, which certainly could be true, or he's being dishonest, or he's being misled by his advisors. Because the only thing that Iran has agreed to is allowing these inspectors to come in and inspect the sites that they say they're allowed to inspect, that the Iranians say we're allowed to inspect. In this way, it's a repeat of the inspections that took place under Obama. And what did the Iranians do under Obama? They just created parallel nuclear facilities, and they continued to build out their nuclear capabilities in facilities that the inspectors were not allowed to inspect, right? So that's all that's going to happen again, right? There's nothing we're going to do to stop them from doing that. So another part of this plan, there are many troubling aspects, but I'm going to focus on some of the highlights. Iran now has access today, as of right now, to billions of dollars in revenues that they're collecting from the oil exports, right? The ban on exports has been lifted. So every single day now they are making roughly $5 billion a day. And Trump has said this, Vance has said this. It's fine because we're going to ensure that they're going to buy food and agricultural products from the United States with that money. Really? Is this a joke? Some of you may recall that we did this with China. And China, of course, did not live up to the deal, right? They didn't buy U.S. agriculture. And Iran is not going to buy U.S. food and U.S. agriculture either. We have no way of enforcing that. Zero. In fact, if you really wanted to make sure that Iran bought food, and this was really your priority, right? If this was your priority, we want to feed the Iranian people and make sure that this money doesn't go to the regime itself so they can build up their military might again. What would you do? You would use Iranian money, purchase U.S. food ourselves, and then send the food to Iran, right? If your priority was making sure that they don't use money to rebuild their military, easy. That's not a puzzle. That's not hard to solve. You just use their money, which we have access to. You buy the food and send them the food. But that's not our priority, right? That's not what we're doing. We just want out of Iran, and we're trying to bribe them to open the Strait of Hormuz and stop the war, right? That's what this is. This is a bribe, and we're paying them massive amounts of money to let us step out of this war. Now, of course, the stock market dropped yesterday. And not only did the US stock market drop yesterday, But global markets dropped yesterday. South Korea, the South Korean stock market plunged by 10% yesterday. Why is that? In Japan, the Japanese stock market dropped nearly 4%. Global markets got punished. The Israeli stock market, which had been flying, has been, dropping ever since this MOU was announced. Why? Because who in the world can trust the United States anymore? Who can depend on the US? This is the problem. And as it relates to the US stock market, if you buy an asset and you think the asset you buy has a certain set of characteristics, and then you discover that this thing you bought doesn't have the characteristics that you thought, you realize you were misled. It was false advertising. And now you want to sell it. You were misled, false advertising. Now I want to get out. But guess what? Everybody else also knows that the characteristics that they thought this asset had, it didn't have. So no one wants to buy from you at the price you bought it. They might buy it, but they'll buy it at a lower price. That is what happened to the US stock market yesterday. Oh no. I thought I was buying a winner. I thought I was buying a country that defeats enemies, that has this fierce military, that is a warrior and defends the world. But you know what? It turns out that's not what I bought. I bought a quitter. I bought something that surrendered to Iran when they had their boot on Iran's throat. So you get a repricing lower. Now, where this repricing ends, hard to say. Maybe it's over, but that's absolutely what happened yesterday. Again, when the US was in the midst of the war and winning, stocks were volatile, right? But overall doing well, even though oil prices were a lot higher than they are now, right? Oil prices dropped significantly and they continued to drop yesterday, and yet the stock market got pounded. Now, what about other countries? Well, the world order for decades has been underpinned by the United States, supporting our allies in Europe, supporting our allies in Asia, supporting our allies in the Middle East from bad actors. But if the United States is going to turn its back on its model its ally that fights shoulder to shoulder with it, and then abandons it, then investing in those other countries also becomes more dangerous because we cut and run easily. We don't have the courage to do semi-difficult things. And again, the reason why I say semi-difficult is because this was only Iran. And we had actually destroyed the most dangerous parts of Iran. They really couldn't hurt us very much anymore. Imagine if we have to go up against China, right? Fighting Iran is like running a 5-mile race. But battling China, that is an ultra marathon. It's not just a marathon, it's an ultra marathon. And if we just flunked the 5-mile race, what about completing an ultra marathon? Forget it, right? Forget it. So our value just dropped, and the value of our allies, our investing in our allies, just dropped as well. So for the moment, it appears that American exceptionalism is over, right? Maybe not forever, Maybe Trump sees the light, but for now, American exceptionalism is over. And we're behaving more like Europeans than Americans, at least the way Americans historically behaved. Right? Trump is saying nice things about radical Islamists, right? He's calling the Iranian regime nice and decent people, and he's blaming Israel for defending itself against Hezbollah, right? If he continues along those lines, and Vance is doing it every day, that cannot possibly end well. What are we doing in Iran? We are attempting to do what is being called a grand bargain with Iran. We are going to give you everything. We're going to make you one of the wealthiest, most successful nations in the world. Come join us, right? Come join us. We're going to throw so much cash at you, right? We're going to create this international $300 billion fund to invest in your economy, right? This is a scheme that could only be dreamed up by New York real estate developers, right? Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, right? They also had this absurd idea of transforming Gaza, right? You remember the name Gaza on the Riviera? Right? They were going to transform Gaza. They were going to, rid Gaza of Hamas and, transform the Palestinian people into people who, love business and love to make money, right? And want to care for their children, right? They don't want to turn their children into suicide bombers anymore, right? Obama made the same mistake. Obama made the same mistake, right? This is the grand bargain they're offering to Iran. And they think by calling Iran nice and decent people and throwing money at them, that they're going to transform these radicals into people who want to be part of the civilized world. It is never going to happen. How do I know that the stock market is giving this thumbs down? And there's various reasons, and I'm going to get into some more of the reasons a bit later. But if you just look at a recent poll, it was conducted by CBS News together with YouGov, which is a professional polling firm. Now CBS just puts the money behind it. YouGov actually goes out and does the polling. It was just conducted. Poll was just completed on June 19th. And it says that 2/3 of Americans, right? So over 60% of Americans say that Iran will either probably or certainly threaten the Middle East again in the coming months. Okay, that's a defeat. Now, the Middle Eastern countries also have that same view, but there it's not 2/3, right? It's not 2/3 of Middle Easterners, of Arabs, think that Iran is going to threaten them. It's close to 100%. So what are they doing? What is the Arab world doing? They are shifting away from the United States. They're trying to protect themselves from attacks against Iran. And how do they protect themselves? Well, step one is they start to cozy up to Iran and they start to throw Israel under the bus, right? That's their first line of defense. Okay? They say nice things about Iran. They throw Iran money, right? So Iran is getting money from all the wealthy Middle East oil producers now, right? Because they're trying to bribe Iran. Please don't hit me again. Don't fire missiles at me again. I'll be your friend. See how dangerous this is? The U.S. caving has all these ripple effects that work against the United States, that work against Israel and favor Iran, right? When you cave, that sends a terrible signal and people start acting and behaving in ways that benefit Iran from the signals we send. Now, why is Trump doing this, right? And we've talked a lot about why Trump is doing this, and I keep coming up with, all these reasons are right. The midterm elections, the pain, the worry he had that high oil prices would damage the U.S. economy, which is even more problematic ahead of midterm elections. There's all kinds of reasons. Walter Russell Mead, who is a great thinker, he works for the Hudson Institute. He's a professor of history. He's a regular contributor to the Wall Street Journal. I heard him speaking the other day, and he said that, the reason why Trump is shifting is because Trump is not a long-term strategic thinker. He lives in the moment 100% of the time. And therefore, he's constantly recalibrating and reassessing his options, shifting and turning. He can say one thing the next day and really mean it. And within hours, completely change his mind and mean the exact opposite of what he said a few hours before. So he's not acting. He just is incredibly short-term focused. He's like the instant gratification monster. His behavior reminds me a lot of hedge fund managers I know. Minute one, or think about if you're an options trader, right? If you're day trading options, as many of you do, right? You could be long the market for 5 minutes, and literally in the blink of an eye, you can turn around and short the market, right? You can be buying calls, and 5 minutes later, you're buying puts, right? That's Trump. And when you're buying calls, you mean it. When you're buying puts, you mean it, right? That's hedge fund style. That's option style day trading. That's the way Trump manages our geopolitics. That's the way he manages our war against Iran. Wherever he sees the wind blowing, he's going to go that direction. He's got no long-term convictions. And this can work in his favor at times. But when you're fighting an enemy that has tremendous endurance, that's in it for the long run, that's fighting the long game, and they're fighting a war that they don't want to win today or tomorrow, they're trying to win the war over the next 100 years. If you back down the second things go, you run into an obstacle, they're going to crush you, right? And right now, Iran is winning because Trump and Americans don't have endurance. And Trump smelled that, right? He sensed it. He saw America was folding, so he folded with the American people. Endurance and grit is required to win against our enemies, because our enemies, countries like Iran, countries like China, countries like Russia, they are playing the long game. And like I said earlier, when we fold, there are very damaging knock-on effects. We talked a little bit about the knock-on effects to the Middle Eastern countries, right? They don't sense that they're safe, and now they're going to protect themselves against a dangerous Iran, and they start throwing money at Iran. They start backing down to Iran. And it not only emboldens Iran, it really makes them stronger right now because they're getting a cash infusion, not only from the oil that they're selling on the open market, right? By the way, they can sell oil in the United States right now, but also because Middle Eastern countries are throwing money at them. And of course, right, if a country like the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia sees that the US turned on Israel, you think they're going to wait around and wait for the US to throw them under the bus too? Heck no, right? They're going to latch on to our enemies. They're not going to think that we're going to be there to stand by them. So that's why the South Korean stock market plunged by 10%. Because who's going to protect South Korea against North Korea? It's not going to be the United States. Can't count on the United States. Why did the Japanese stock market plunge yesterday? Who's going to protect Japan against China? Not the United States. Nope, can't count on the United States. We don't even stand by our model ally who fought with us shoulder to shoulder. So if you want to know why, those of you who are following currencies, the dollar, and you know what, I should have seen this coming, right? From last week when our comparison is Trump, Churchill, or Neville Chamberlain, should have seen the dollar rally coming, right? Should have seen it. Why? Because I don't want to hold the euro. I don't want to hold any country currency in the world right now because this is America only. It's not America first, it's American only. And if it's America only, I'm selling everything. I'm getting out of all the other currencies and I'm only holding the dollar. Now, typically, when oil prices come down sharply the way they do, the dollar doesn't do very well. And a currency like the euro does very well. Why is that? Because oil prices, oil is priced in dollars. So when oil goes up, you need more dollars to buy a barrel of oil. So if you need more dollars, when oil prices go up, dollar demand increases. I need more dollars to buy my oil. That causes an increase in dollar demand and the dollar strengthens, right? When oil goes up. Now, when oil comes down, the reverse happens. I need less dollars to buy oil. So I don't have to hold as many dollars. I sell the dollar, I buy foreign currencies. But even though oil plunged and it continues to drop, the dollar has been strengthening. Strengthening. Why? Because this is America only. It's not America first. No country is safe. I don't want to hold any other currencies other than the dollar because the United States is no longer the guardian of the world order, right? The US is abandoning the world order. We're abandoning our allies. So sell everything and run to the dollar. That's what's going on. By the way, zero people are talking about this. You'll never hear this on CNBC, on any of the financial news. You'll never hear any hedge fund because they don't understand geopolitics at all, right? And this is something that I have a big comparative advantage in. I understand this. I see this very, very clearly, and it makes sense. The other thing that's not going on, right? You could say, well, the dollar's strengthening because Kevin Warsh was hawkish. Yes, that's true and that happened, but it's not continuing to happen, right? If that were continuing to happen, bond yields would be going higher. US bond yields would be going higher, but they're not. US bond yields are going lower now. They're dropping. Normally, when US bond yields decline, the dollar weakens, but US bond yields are dropping and the dollar continues to strengthen. Why? Because it's America only, right? The only way you can make sense of a rising dollar, even though oil prices are dropping, even though bond yields are dropping, right? It's because it's America only and no other place is safe other than the United States. And by the way, it's not that we're safe, right? We're not safe. We're just safer than all the countries that we're abandoning. At least that's how the market is reading it. Now, does this mean the stock market is going to go down and down and down and the dollar is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger? No, it does not mean that at all. Because just like tariffs caused a one-off adjustment in the market and then we stabilized and eventually recovered, that's the way the market works, right? This will also run its course. Markets will stabilize and then investors will refocus on our tremendous corporate sector, our huge corporate earnings, our strong economy, and people will sort of forget about Trump's horrendous policies, at least for the time being. So I'm not saying we're in a downward spiral at all. I'm explaining to you what has happened and what continues to happen to a degree. But this isn't going to go on forever. And maybe we're over the worst of it. In fact, for you in the currency program, I'm like ready to jump on a short dollar against the Mexican peso. It's either going to be today or tomorrow. We're going to pull the trigger. I think the currency has moved enough. So we're getting close to the time where we have to jump in. But that's why the dollar has rallied. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how do you win wars? How do you win wars? Against bad actors, against terrible ideologies, murderous ideologies, who never quit, who have tremendous endurance, who have tremendous stamina. Now, the United States unquestionably has the most powerful, the most sophisticated, the most technologically advanced military in the world. Okay? But just like you can have the most talented athlete in the world, that doesn't mean the most talented soccer player is the best guy on the field, right? I'm using soccer because it's the World Cup. It doesn't mean that, the most talented quarterback is the best quarterback, right? Tom Brady was not the fastest. He was not the most athletically skilled. He was not. The most brilliant person isn't the most successful person, right? To win consistently requires desire, hard work, putting in the effort, resilience. So I just got back from Israel, as you know, and it was, I always have a tremendous time in Israel. But this is where, when I was in Israel, we started to see, Trump really fold. That's really where it started in a big way. And I was sort of contrasting Israeli society with American society. And I identified three characteristics of what creates a resilient society. And one thing you can say about the Israeli people, they are resilient, right? I may have mentioned this from Israel. Iran was firing missiles into Israel, so we were, running into the bomb shelter, and no one was complaining. No one was, engaging in self-pity. People were upbeat. People were making jokes. People were telling stories. People were comforting each other. Resilience. When you think about Israeli society, resilience is one of the first ideas that comes to your mind. And what is it about the Israeli people that gives them this resilience? And I came up with three characteristics, and then we're going to apply it to America. Number one, Israelis, whether you're religious or not religious, they have really a strong sense of values, a really strong sense of values. Family is such a big thing. Every single family in Israel sits down on Friday night for Shabbat dinner. They may never go to a synagogue ever, but they sit down for Shabbat dinner. And, even if they don't have a wife and children of their own, they go to someone else's family. They go to relatives. Shabbat dinner is an integral part. Family, 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 right? This is a really important value. Most Israelis, not all, but most, have a belief in God, right? This is a core part of their value system. Not everyone, there's for sure some atheists, but for the most part, Israelis believe in God. Okay? Strong sense of values. They also, second characteristic, they have a mission, a sense of mission and purpose. Okay? And that sense of mission, depending on who you are, it could vary. For some people, it's we are the only Jewish state in the world. And because we're the only Jewish state in the world, that gives me, as an individual living in this Jewish state, a real purpose, a sense of mission. I have to defend this country because we're a country of only 10 million people and only 9 million Jews. All right? I have to be loyal to my people, to my country. Others say, we're the only democracy in the Middle East, right? And that gives them a sense of purpose. Right? There's no other democracy in the entire Middle East. All the other countries are authoritarian or totalitarian, but no democracies. Some people say Turkey's the democracy. It's not. They have elections, but they're all fraudulent. Those elections, every single one of those elections are fixed. They're rigged. So that gives some people a sense of mission. I need to defend this democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East. Another A third possibility for some people is we're always under attack. We're always under attack, and I have to defend my country, right? I have to be a strong person. I have to be a warrior, because if I'm not a warrior, who's going to be the warrior for me? So this also gives people a sense of mission. Constantly being under attack gives you a sense of purpose. The final thing, the final characteristic is Israelis, all of them, do hard things. And the most common hard thing that they do, right? Maybe these days it's running to bomb shelters, but beyond that, military service in Israel is compulsory, right? You got to do military service, and that is a hard thing. And when you do hard things repeatedly, again and again and again, it makes you resilient. So these are the three characteristics. And the United States, we used to do very well on these three characteristics, but not anymore, right? The United States, we don't have a common sense of values anymore. And many Americans don't really have any values at all. And that's why you have a lot of Americans marching in the streets for Hamas and Hezbollah. That's how New York City elects Mamdani, right? And then just last night, Mamdani's candidates did very well in the Democratic primaries. Like, my God, it's only getting worse and worse. That only happens, right? This radical move to the fringes, right? When you don't have values, right? A Mamdani on the left, a Tucker Carlson who you can't even say he's on the right anymore. But, that only happens in a country that's not, when you go to the extremes. It's a society that has, it's not, many families of course have values, right? I'm sure all of you have good values, but that is not broadly representative of America anymore. It used to be, but not anymore. What about our sense of mission and purpose? What is it? What is it that we're willing to fight for? What is it that we're willing to die for, to put our lives on the line for, right? Very few people can say, I'm willing to put my life on the line for this. And every single day when I get up in the morning, this is my purpose. This is my mission. And my mission is aligned to the national interest, right? My mission is aligned to the national interest. And I have a commonality with my neighbor, with someone who I may disagree with on politics. I may disagree with them, but here we're totally aligned. We don't have that in the United States. We once did. We don't anymore. And then finally, doing hard things. Yeah, many of us do hard things, but again, it's not part, as a nation, as a country, we don't collectively do the same hard thing that bonds us together, right? That creates a warmth and a love and a respect for one another. Right? When you do hard things together, like my son, the camaraderie he has with his teammates in the army, right? That's an unbreakable bond. And that's, that's part of the Israeli national psyche, right? We don't have these things. And therefore, we have become, in general, pretty fragile as a society. And we throw in the towel very quickly. And we think we can't defeat the barbarians, right? We don't have the stomach for it because we're too busy kind of focused on an easy life, a materialistic life, chasing money, avoiding struggle, avoiding doing hard things. We think a good life is kind of an easy life. And we complain when oil prices go too high and we're paying too much at the pump, right? You're not going to defeat evil. And evil is out there. It's surrounding us. If you don't have these three characteristics. And again, it's not about potential. Yeah, Trump says again and again, we have the best military in the world. But what is the best military in the world worth if you're going to fold after 38 days of fighting, right? You need values. You need a sense of mission, purpose, and you need to be accustomed to doing hard things. So fighting wars, you know what? It's hard, it's difficult. There's sacrifice involved, there's loss involved. But you know what? We got to do the hard things if we want to be the America that we need to be, right? So anyway, that's the talk for today. And hopefully we're going to get our act together. Hopefully Trump sees the light. I don't think it's over. I'm not giving up. But for the moment, you know, you have JD Vance sort of seeming to be calling the shots, and Trump is listening to all the wrong people. So at the moment, we're headed in the wrong direction. But it's not too late. I'm still hopeful. I'm not predicting it. I'm still hopeful we can turn it around. Now, again, at some point, just like the markets priced in tariffs, the markets will price this in, and the bleeding will stop. And you know, the last I looked, the market was up. It's up less than it was. But at some point we'll price it in, and this isn't going to be like a 20% collapse in the stock market. That's not what we're looking at. But I do think that, you know, while we're in retreat, we could have a bit more downside to go here, because what we bought a few weeks ago, right? What we thought we bought, I'm talking about as an investor. I thought I was buying America the brave, the America the courageous, the America that defeats enemies. You know what? That's not who I bought. I bought something else. So I need to change up my portfolio a little bit. And there may not be a buyer at the price I want to sell at. So that could mean we do get more lower repricing for a little bit. Okay, everybody. Questions, comments?